Hello, everyone. Welcome back to this week's Cedarville Stories podcast. I'm Mark Weinstein. Today in the program, I'm joined by Lorne Scharnberg, a leader whose life sits at the intersection of business, generosity, faith, and mentorship. Mark earned a bachelor's degree in management from Cedarville University in 1997, and today he is the president of a family-owned business after taking it over from his dad, Lorne Scharnberg, a former trustee who devoted his life to advancing Christian higher education at Cedarville University before his passing in 2025. Let's go to my conversation with Lorne Scharnberg on this week's Cedarville Stories podcast. Mark, thanks for joining me this week on the Cedarville Stories podcast. It's great to have you here. I want to begin the podcast by talking about the legacy your father has had, not only in your life and your family's life, but really in the life of Cedarville University. How would you put that into words?
Boy, I can't think of any other organization that my father didn't pour himself into more than Cedarville. So really what happened is when I was looking at a university to go to, I just had in my mind I was going to go to a Christian college. And the only college I had in mind was Cedarville, and I can't even tell you why. Wow. I had a friend's brother that came here, and so when I decided to come here, there was somebody in our church that was connected to Dr. Dixon, and they were looking for a board member. And so the first year I came, they were then in talks with my dad to be a board member, or were looking at him to be a board member. And so ever since I went to Cedarville, and then since then, he's been on the board. He's served in some kind of capacity. He's been on the business boards as well. Right. And so I can't think, besides our church, I can't think of a single organization that he hasn't dedicated more of himself to than Cedarville.
So based on that, is it fair to say that really his connection with Cedarville started with you and your education?
It really did, because, he wanted me, I don't think he knew much about Cedarville when I wanted to go here. He wanted me to visit like 10, 15 different universities and,
Sure.
Kind of do my rounds. And I'm like, I already know where I want to go. I want to go to Cedarville. But again, I can't tell you why. But I was just drawn to go to Cedarville. And part of it was 10 hours away, and I wanted to cut ties with my parents. I was an only child, so I had to get away, and,
Sure.
and they weren't going to show up every weekend. It was far enough to where, I'd be kind of left alone and kind of grow as a person. And so, but yeah, it was this. And then I think it was the connection to the family that was in our church and recommending him as a board member.
Yeah.
And he's always had a passion for Christian education. So We've always supported Christian education, whether it was high schools or colleges. So it was kind of a natural fit. And he loved the college age student. So every time he came on campus, he always sat in the cafeteria. He wanted to eat with the students, take students out to dinner and things like that. And so this was his passion, was the Christian education and Cedarville University. So
I must ask, okay, your dad passed away last year. How are you doing in your family in general in his passing? Because I know it was a shock at the time.
Yeah, it was a shock. I'd say that those that are part of family businesses probably understand a little bit better, because when you work with a family member, it's not really the same type of relationship. And so there's a little bit of therapy. When he died, I had to quickly clear out his office and make sure that work was going. And then we had estate planning issues. And so it was almost like you skip the mourning process because there's so many things to do when an event like that happens. And so it's kind of a unique situation, to be honest with you. And so it kind of pops up on my radar, I guess, every so often, probably more so than if I would have just mourned in a regular way early on. And so, yeah, it's just kind of different, but I think we're doing good and we miss them, but it's one of those things where life just keeps moving on. That's the way he described it, right? You can only step in a stream once, right? With that moving water, you'll never step in that same spot again, and so time just keeps moving forward, and he's in a better place. That's really what is nice to know too that he's in heaven, and so we have hope of seeing him again, so.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that update. And you appear to be doing well in a very tough situation. So as I was thinking about today's podcast, one thing that jumped out in my mind was that the Scharnberg family has made one of the largest financial contributions in the history of Cedarville University for the Scharnberg Business and Communication Center. So when you think of that and think of the impact, how meaningful is it to you this day?
So it's kind of unique because, growing up, my parents spent a lot of time with me teaching me about finances. And one of the things that they did and that I did with my kids is that for every dollar I was given or every dollar I made, it didn't really matter. I was to give 10%, save 20%, and then I got to decide with what I want to do with the 70%. And they were very generous. And so that's one thing I really took hold of is that, God gives to us not to increase our standard of living, but to increase our standard of giving. And so, and when it came to that gift in particular, so when my mom died, 6-7 years before my dad did. And so I took over the finances of the business when she did that. And the first thing I did was I kind of set up a system of giving, right? Because when you have a business and you have means, you have a lot of people that knock on your door. There's a lot of nonprofits out there and there's a lot of good causes and
sure.
Some are Christian based, some are not, and so I wanted to give a lot to a few than a little to a lot, right? And so I set up this system of giving where we were giving $100,000 per month to 5 different organizations. Mm-hmm. And so about every, twice a year we'd give that. And then we had 2 extra months to give. And Cedarville was one of those 5 organizations that we partnered with. And so not only did we give, but we prayed, we served. And so we were kind of all in on those 5 organizations. It was one day where I was walking over lunch and I've never had a more clear calling than I did that day. And it was really, and I can't tell you I've had one since, it was almost, he didn't verbally speak to me, but it was such a clear calling. It felt like it was a verbal. It felt that it was verbal, right?
Right.
And it was, and so I immediately on the walk stopped. I called up Dr. White and I just said, listen, I feel like I want to give to the business building because where are you at? And I had no clue where they were at with the planning. And I just knew at one time it was an idea and it was part of the capital campaign. And I said, and I had in mind a figure that I wanted to give that I thought I could give over 5 years. It would be a stretch, and this was in addition to the giving we were already doing.
Sure.
And so when I asked him, I said, what would it take to get the naming rights? Had you already done that? And I didn't know. And he said, nope, they're still there. And I said, what would it typically take to get the naming rights? And he told me, and he's like, usually you have to give about 50% of the cost of the building. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, well, what do you think that building's going to cost? And he told me, and it lined up exactly with the number I had in my head. And I'm like, well, I'd like to do that. And I like it to be a surprise.
Yeah.
And so then we kind of came up with an idea for how to present it, and we did that in that one chapel. And so I just didn't think there was any other better way to honor my father than, for giving as many years as he did to Cedarville. And it was a business building, which meant a lot to us because we're in business,
right.
And so it was just kind of a neat thing to do. And he always talked about his friends that were on the board that gave and not that he was seeking naming rights, but that, it was just a really neat thing to do to be able to make a larger contribution like that. And so, it was, that was really neat. And the way it was presented was really nice. And that he was able to, my fear is okay, he's older and it's going to take 5 years and I don't know when they're going to start building this thing. And is he going to actually see it when it's done? And he did. And he loved it. And he was there for a few years after that. And, he got to enjoy it. So,
well, I knew from the story that the Lord planted the idea in your mind and heart. And I knew it was going to be a surprise to your dad. So how did your dad respond to the surprise when he learned? That's a story, huh?
Yeah. He was shocked. I mean, so we had him up, so Dr. White came up with an idea to honor him, for his years of service and give him that that, I don't know what they call it, the Medal of Honor.
Medallion?
And the medallion, up on stage. And then he was going to present it. And I think when he was up on stage, and when you're up on stage and you're facing all the people and the lights and stuff, you're probably not fully listening. And he had a hard time listening anyway. He wasn't the greatest listener. He'd rather tell you stories than to listen to what you wanted to say, right? And so I don't know if he even caught it right away, and so you could kind of see his mind, like as it was receiving the information, and then it finally took hold, and then it was like, okay, what did you just do, and then I kind of got nervous, like, okay, I just signed up for 5 years, $10 million gift without even consulting them. I figured he'd be okay with it, but and I would say that was one of the toughest things I've ever done, because we had to go through COVID. In the middle of COVID, COVID hit, and we were losing money, and I still paid $1 million every 6 months. And so I think coming out of that, I just had in my mind that God was going to give us the means to be able to do it. And I went into debt some through COVID, and on the backside of COVID, it all came back, and we're doing great now. And I think part of that is just God rewarding the obedience of the calling that he gave me, and I also think sometimes when you're given a big calling, that's when usually the calling is more clear, and I felt like, okay, that was a big calling. It was done in a very clear way. And now it's my chance to be obedient to it, but yeah, so he took it, and he was so excited, like he was excited for a very long time. He couldn't believe I did it.
Yeah.
I think I gained a lot of trust from that standpoint, like he didn't know I'm an only child, and he's basically handing off this business to me. And it kind of just showed him I didn't love money. I didn't,
right.
I want to give. And so I felt like I built a lot of trust with him on that. And
sure.
From that time forth, he had no problem handing off the business and the decision-making, and just really figured that he was in good hands, basically. Yeah. And I kind of, when my mom died, I kind of helped him with his checkbook, and I made sure his finances were in order as well. Yeah.
So collectively, your dad and yourself, what would you say is, in your mind, the hope for what transpires from the Scharnberg Business and Communication Center? What do you hope that comes from your gift?
Well, I really like where Cedarville's at now, right? And, there's times that Cedarville's past that I don't know if I could say that, but right now it's in good hands with what Dr. White's doing and the team he's built and everybody that's there. It's a really bright light, right?
It is.
And the way I view giving is this: I'm obedient to God when I give, and God can use it how he feels fit, right? And so if the person I'm giving to misuses that gift at some point, well, that's out of my hands, because I was obedient to my calling.
Yeah.
And I trust that the person that receives it now is going to be obedient to their calling. And I feel like Dr. White is. I think that not only the business building and the business department, which, I kind of have a long for, because that's the department I came through.
Right.
And I always wondered why we had the short end of the stick. At the time I went to Cedarville, it was the biggest department there was. And we were kind of stuck in Milner, and all of a sudden all these other things started getting these big buildings. And I'm like, okay, what's wrong with business here? What I mean? And so now it's kind of a prominent place on campus, and which is kind of nice. And, I love Cedarville. I love the fact that there's chapel every day. I love the fact that everyone has to have a Bible minor. The school that I started, actually, we're partnering with Cedarville. We're using a lot of Cedarville education, things that they provide high schools.
Good.
And it's a Christian school, and we're actually using the Bible minor that Cedarville uses for our Bible classes.
Oh, that's great.
And so, yeah, so it's kind of a great synergy with that, and they've really helped out a lot. And so, yeah, my daughter goes there now. She's a sophomore. She just finished. She just took her last test, so she is now officially done with her sophomore year.
She's a junior now,
and she'll be a junior. So it goes fast. When you look back, it seems like a long time, 4 years, but it goes really fast. What was neat was that her freshman year was the first year that the business building was open.
Oh, that's special.
And so, yeah, she just completed her sophomore year at Cedarville. And so she's got 2 more years, but then she just started pole vaulting on the track team. And so she has an extra year of eligibility. So whether she stays at Cedarville or maybe goes somewhere else, I'm not sure what the actual plan is, but she's really enjoying it. So she loves it. And I can, I've seen her grow, not only in her walk with God, but also just her maturity, like most people do in college,
Yeah.
and so it's just kind of fun to see.
So, as I said in the introduction, you're president of Katecho, a great company in Des Moines. You're leading a successful company. You're also investing in young athletes. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But you're also, as you said, giving generously. What in your mind ties all those elements together that in a nice package is who you are?
Well, I think it's more of so, what God wants me to do is what kind of ties it all together, because, I think God gives gifts to a lot of different people, and there's a lot of different gifts, right?
Absolutely.
And that's how it works. And so, for me, my calling wasn't to be on the mission field, but you can do mission in everything you do. And so I believe that God has blessed us with the ability to make money, and the business that we have is very profitable. It's grown, and we've seen the hand of God many, many times. I can tell you stories of where there's no other explanation but God. And so again, it kind of goes back to that adage, why is God doing this? Why do we have this business? And how can we use it?
Yeah.
And it's a little bit difficult. I tried during a few years to really, I met with my management team and we did Bible studies and things like that. But you got to be a little bit careful that you don't get perceived forcing things like that on people and stuff. And so, I kind of backed off on that, but I use this as a tool to give, so, it's profitable. We make money. And so we try to support those that have other gifts that are out, being sent to the mission field and those kind of things. And so.
Yeah. Tell us about Katecho. What do you do?
Okay.
What's your product? Or what are you in business for?
So my father started Katecho in 1984. Before that, he worked at Medtronic back in the 60s.
Yeah.
He worked his way up. He was head of the sales force. He was hired away to start ventures for other people. And he did that several times. The last one I remember was a venture in Texas and around the Galveston area, Lake Jackson. And he started a catheter business. And then he got it up to where it was running. They sold it. And then he came to Iowa to partner with somebody that he knew that was doing pacemakers with Intermedics.
Okay.
And so as he was doing that, he always wanted to start his own business. And so he finally started his own business, and he tried to start it with an implantable hernia mesh. And so while he was waiting for that to get cleared through the FDA, and he did studies, I remember he went up to Iowa State, he did animal studies and things like that, when you could still do those kind of studies. And he paid a seminary student from Faith Baptist Bible College $500 to come up with a Greek name that was unique, that had something to do with what he was doing. And that's how we got the name Katecho. So Katecho means to restrain or to hold back. And the hernia mesh sort of does that. And it was Greek and it was unique. And that's how we got our name. But it never did get through the FDA. While he was waiting, he called around to people he knew in the industry, and somebody wanted to outsource disposable defib electrodes. And this was way before AEDs. And so, most AED or most defibrillation was done with paddles.
Right.
And those were reusable electrodes.
Right.
And they were just starting to move into disposable electrodes. And so we're the second company to ever manufacture disposable defib electrodes. And now we're the oldest. The first company's, out of business. They went out of business a few years after that. And our company really just grew as that transition went from paddles to disposable. And then the AED market came on. And so we're one of the world's largest manufacturers of defib electrodes.
Wow.
From that, we went into making hydrogel, which is a component. And that's really what our niche is custom designing, formulating hydrogels.
Okay.
It's gotten us into products that got us into cosmetics, wound care, other types of electrodes, you name it. It's, it can be used as an adhesive. It can be a carrier. We design hydrogels against different types of conductor plates. And then we had an opportunity to go into pharma patches, like lidocaine. So lidocaine is a pharma patch that uses hydrogel. And so about 15 years ago, we made the jump into pharma. And that's when we started Surmasis. And Surmasis is 3 Latin words put together. It means to heal with medicine through skin. And so Katecho is our medical device manufacturing, and Surmasis is our pharmaceutical manufacturing.
So as someone who's leading these companies, how do you define success?
I don't really worry about, success. My goal over the last 10 or so years was to work myself out of a job. So I've got a team of 3 guys that I've built up, and they're amazing, and they basically run the business. And, for us, we just keep going. We just keep pushing forward as hard as we can. And whether we're a $100 million company, $200 million company, we don't define that as success.
Yeah.
We enjoy business, the art of negotiation. I love manufacturing. That's my passion, is operations. And so we just love what we do. We don't really care how big we are. And so from that standpoint, we're not driven by any kind of certain types of metrics, but with whatever we have in front of us, we try to do the best we can possibly do, And we don't really do a lot of marketing. And so most of the growth we have and most of the business we have is business that has found us. And, my dad was a salesman and I'm an operations guy, and we butted heads a lot.
Yeah. Tell me about that. Because I would think
it's oil and water, just so you know. We had a lot of fighting early on. But when you're a salesman, you really think in terms of revenue, and when you're an operations guy, you really think in terms of profit. And so, my focus was more on saving $1, and his focus was on trying to go sell that next $1, and he didn't really care how profitable it was. And so it was really a good handoff, because it took a salesman to build something from nothing.
Right. It does.
And I just don't think I could have done that. But he got it to a certain point where then it got big enough to where he needed somebody to come in and really start working on the inside of the business, and that's where I loved coming in. And so I joined the business full-time in 99, and I worked there in the summers when he paid well. Sometimes he didn't pay well, so I found employment somewhere else. And so I started in 99, and I started in manufacturing, and I just kind of worked my way up from there, and so we got the inside of the business going well. And then, for the last couple of years, there was a transition where he came to me and said, "You know what, I'm going to hand off the business to you because I want to dedicate myself to Cedarville."
Nice.
Because he knew he's going to go through a 4 or 5 year hard stretch where he was going to devote a lot of his time to Cedarville. And so that was when I got really the final keys to the kingdom. And he stepped away for 4 or 5 years. And when he came back, it was a lot different. And he really struggled with that because he didn't know where the business was at. People were different. Systems were different. And what he came back to was a lot different than when he left. And so he just had a hard time finding his place.
Yeah.
So,
but different also means advancement, correct?
It did, but at the same time, when you're used to being chief your whole life, and then all of a sudden now you're not chief anymore, that's a hard step back for someone.
It is.
And that was a really hard step back from him. He went from being on the chair of the board at Cedarville, from being CEO of Katecho and all these things, and then all of a sudden now he's more in a smaller role, I would say. Right. And he just had a hard time finding his place, and he could never retire. He came into work every day and just talked to people, and it drove him nuts not to be busy. And so he had a hard time with my mom passing away, and he was never built to be alone, right? And so that was killing him, you know. Yeah. And so it wasn't until he got remarried, and then where then he really got active again, and it kind of changed his perspective, and you could just tell his whole attitude was different, which was good, so.
Well, I have one more question related to Katecho, and then I want to move into Iowa United, which is a basketball ministry that you lead. So you said something where there were many days, maybe weeks, years, I don't know, where you and your dad butted heads, oil and vinegar, right? So knowing that, and then knowing that you gained trust from him by giving Cedarville the money, Speak to the importance in your mind and in your heart that meant, because that had to be a very important moment when you know the history, but now your dad fully trusts you.
Yeah, and I kind of go back to another statement I said too, that unless you're in a family business, you don't really fully understand, and that is, you don't have a normal relationship, and I worked with my parents, and so it just was a lot different. And it may not be true with all family businesses, but a lot of family businesses, I believe, they experience the same thing. And so I felt like I didn't have normal parents, right? And we didn't have a normal relationship, and it was strained at times. And so it was tough, and we fought a lot. And what was nice about it was that we were in it together, right? Like we were family. So there's no way he could fire. I mean, I guess he could have fired me, but he didn't. If I was in a normal business and I fought with the CEO like I did with him, I would have been fired, And so, but through that, good things came out of it though, too, and a lot of times you have to go through hard times to build something that's better, right? Yeah. And so a lot of good things came out of our fighting, but it was a lot of fighting. And when he stepped away, all of a sudden he trusted me enough at that point to step away. But then when I made that gift, then really all the pieces fell in line. I felt that he's like, okay, I trust him not only now, but even when I'm gone, that money's not going to ruin him, right? And so, because that's the big danger, like you see these family businesses, you see a lot of wealthy people, and good times make weak men, right? And weak men make very bad times,
right? And
so, the challenge is how do we not allow this gift? Because a lot of times God gives gifts, and it can also ruin you, and so you got to be careful. And I just saw the sense of like, okay, I'm fully trusting then him. Now I don't know about his kids, I'm not sure what went through his mind, but I just felt like that final piece fell in place to where like, okay, I can fully trust him going forward to do what's right, to give, to support ministries. I think at that time, out of the 5 different organizations that we were supporting, Cedarville was one that he brought to the table, right? Mm-hmm. And so Cedarville was really one that he brought to the table, but I think in the back of his mind, he's like, will Mark continue to give to Cedarville? He wasn't probably sure. And so when I made that donation, I think it also said, okay, he's going to support Cedarville going forward. And I did it because I believed in Dr. White and his team and where Cedarville was heading. The transition they made to, go back to the Word of God and revamp the whole the campus for that, and I love the 1,000 days, and trying not just to prepare young people for a profession, but to disciple them,
right,
and follow the same model that Jesus did with his disciples that he had for 3.5 years. Because you can truly do a mission in whatever you're given. And so it's just finding ways to serve God with wherever God sends you, And so I love that campaign. And then how Dr. White has, with his staff, has really put it in about every aspect of life on campus.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to the Cedarville Stories podcast, brought to you by Cedarville University. To learn more about Cedarville, visit our website at cedarville.edu or click on the link below in the show notes. Be sure to come back next week when we'll share another Cedarville story for God's glory.